And then the only thing I want to do next is just make sure that I can share it. Yep. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share this to the group. Okay. Yeah, we are looking good, brother.
Cool.
So there's that. And just give me one moment while I pull a couple things up here. Okay. All right, Jason, welcome. We are here today, ladies and gentlemen. We're going live on my main profile page here as a little bit of a change here today, and also feeding this conversation directly into the Making Peace with Porn conversation, into the Making Peace with Porn group. So we are here live today with Jason Keene of Daring Hearts. Jason, it's Daring Hearts.
Daring Heart Conscious Relationships.
Conscious relationships.
Daring Heart, singular, kind of one word.
Apologies.
Kind of like Brave Heart.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful, brother. Well, Jason, I appreciate having you on here today, brother. I look forward to diving into this conversation with you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just start by giving you an introduction, and I'm going to go ahead and give the floor to you once we open it up here. And so Jason Keene collaborates with conscious couples and individuals and shows them how to create greater connection, energy, and impact by grounding their spiritual growth in the principles of conscious relating. Jason brings 20 years of developing teams and leaders in professional environments such as Blockbuster Video, Whole Food Market, and Mind-Body Software, combined with over a decade of powerful one-on-one work in the fields of clinical hypnotherapy, alchemical hypnotherapy, hypnotic EMDR, hypnotic coaching, recovery coaching, NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, healing touch, Reiki, and conscious relationship coaching. He also brings many insights from his extensive immersion in the world's spiritual traditions and blends it all to facilitate the emergence and actualization of the authentic essential self in the lives of those he works with. One of his greatest gifts is his ability to compassionately empathize with struggling couples and individuals and help them shift into epic clarity and skillfulness in their relationships. Jason, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, brother. It's an honor to have you here.
To be here.
Yeah, brother. Yeah, brother. And just, I messed up a little bit on the name of your coaching business, but that's just because I feel like I just got a little bit of a blanked out for a moment there. So please forgive me. But we did talk about it.
No problem.
So.
Yeah, it's no big deal.
Cool, man. Hey, brother. We're so honored to have you here, and I would love to just kind of begin today by opening the conversation up around maybe a little bit of your history, a little bit of your background, and the intention for this work and for the Making Peace community is really to open up the conversation around masculinity, healthy sexuality, healthy relationships, and I felt whenever we connected and I saw the work you're doing in regard to the conscious relationships, I thought it would be a great fit to the conversation. So really appreciate having you here, and I would love to just open the conversation up today, letting you kind of talk about maybe your background and a little bit about where you're coming from.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm inspired to start off with just a statement around the fact that, regardless of what my focus may be, or what your focus may be, or the other guests who you've been having on, one thing is for sure, to be in the group that you're facilitating, and for either of us to be in this conversation, I recognize one major commonality, which is about having a growth mindset. And I know I've seen some dialogue about that in the group as well. And I think that's something that is worth pointing out, because whatever I share, whatever I'm about to share about my background will plug into your reality and the reality of anybody who's watching, because whether we're talking about relationship problems specifically, or whether we're talking about, addiction of whatever kind, whether it's alcoholism or porn addiction or whatever, the invitation in all of these challenges is always about coming into the self in some greater capacity, and becoming more of who we actually really are, and aligning our lives with that. And that's what is at the center of a growth mindset for me. And I feel like anybody who's listening should be able to connect with that. So my background is very much about struggle and triumph and service, kind of in that order, where probably about 15 years ago, I ended up having a divorce, and that sent me on the path of really committing myself to my growth and the commitment to letting my output in the world be something of service, rather than just about building myself up and gratifying my own wants and needs and desires. So I ended up getting trained in hypnotherapy to start off, because it was a sort of it was a way of directly, simultaneously helping myself to do a lot of the reprogramming that I knew I needed to do in order to align with the life that I knew I was actually being called into. And I also knew that it was going to help me learn things that I could pass on to others as well. So I went through the whole certification, and a few years later, added on a number of the things that you mentioned in the introduction: hypnotherapy, NLP, recovery coaching, which plugs in quite a bit to the whole porn addiction scenario, because recovery coaching is all about, helping somebody. What I was doing anyway was helping people to rebuild their lives and rebuild their relationships and their relationship with themselves, as a way of getting back on their feet and leaving the pain and the dysfunction of whatever particular addiction it might have been that they were struggling with in the past. So recovery is about basically getting back up on your feet, standing on your own 2 feet, and being in alignment with yourself. Whether it's alcohol or cigarettes or gambling or even workaholism or porn, there's a lot of common themes involved in letting go of understanding and letting go of the old pattern, and then creating new patterns. Mm-hmm. That's the fundamental essence of everything that I've ever done, as far as hypnotherapy, NLP, recovery coaching, relationship coaching, identifying the patterns that don't work, letting them go, and replacing them with patterns that do work. And that whole journey inevitably involves a lot of self-knowledge. I would imagine on your journey, you could probably relate to the thought that the ability to get back up on your own 2 feet, align your life with your core values, stepping back into a place of honor and integrity and nobility, has had everything to do with really connecting with yourself, who you really are, what your values really are, and the higher calling of purpose that you've stepped into. So those are some of the things in my background that really speak to me. Currently, I'm focused, my whole business for a few years now has been focused on relationships, conscious relationships. I often like to use the word evolutionary or evolutionary partnerships, because a lot of the people that I know, whether we are growth-oriented individuals with this past or that past or another kind of a past, one of the themes that we've discovered, certainly that I've noticed in my life, is that all of the challenges, all of those repatterning experiences, all of those repatterning challenges of letting go of the old and bringing in the new that's more aligned with who and what we really are, will inevitably involve other people. And a lot of the emphasis of the path of personal development, personal growth and spirituality is very focused on the inner world, the ontological, self-connection and personal connection with God, spirit, source, or even just personal growth, like becoming a better athlete, becoming a better businessman or woman, getting better at, whatever endeavors we're trying to become better at. There's a lot of focus on the self, which there should be, because that's where it all starts. But ultimately, the next step is almost always going to be calibrating to and refining the way we are showing up in relation to other people. So, and that was one of the things that I think we brought up when you and I had our initial conversation around porn addiction, and the fact that in my experience anyway, it was absolutely inseparable. Like my ability to recognize that pattern and replace it with a new and better pattern absolutely integrally involved the process also of recalibrating to a healthier relationship to my wife at the time and partners after that. So letting go of that addiction and replacing it with something else absolutely comes back to also how to have healthy relationships with other people, healthy relationships with the self, and healthy relationships with, particularly if you're a man, a healthy relationship with a woman.
Yeah.
And personally for me, I found out, this is a very personal statement, I don't expect this to be true for every man, but I found that in order for me to have a healthy relationship with myself and a healthy relationship with my partner, there simply wasn't any room for a porn addiction or, even just like use of porn at all, because ultimately, for me, again, I don't expect this to be true for every man. In fact, it's true for many men. Porn really doesn't actually represent anything actually satisfying. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's a very common attempt at replacing something that's actually irreplaceable, which is what we're talking about, this connection with self and a healthy connection with another person. And I have no judgment for anyone who's currently, trying to meet that need for connection and intimacy and sexuality in that way, because I've been there and I totally understand how that works. But yeah, it's not actually a healthy replacement for the real deal. And what I'm standing for in my life and what I'm trying to help people do in life and relationships is to really actually learn how to show up to the real deal, to, the real value of self-connection and the real value of healthy interpersonal relationships, because that is life, in my opinion. That's what makes life worth living.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. I appreciate that so much. And when I hear you talking, like, I think when I hear like conscious relationship coaching, I immediately think like, relationship around, coaching around relationships with your partner. But, reflecting upon that further, I'm realizing it could be relationships with anyone, relating to anything or anyone in a healthier way. And in that regard, maybe not even people, but just in the way we relate to the world, maybe, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a crucial point. Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier too, like the whole personal development and spirituality paradigm really does, for a very important reason, always come back to the self. Yeah, because whatever our relationship with our essential self is will be reflected in our relationship with another person, or like you said, other people, family, friends, or life itself.
Yeah.
And yeah, I have a lot of recurring themes show up around that in the work that I've been doing.
What do you think? I mean, what do you think is like results in healthier connection with others? You mentioned it has a lot to do with the internal work we're doing, right? Like as we relate better with ourselves, we're then able to relate and connect better with others, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the entry point that seems to click for a lot of people is to recognize that one of the first or like most fundamental relationships that we have, and I'm going to get a little bit spiritual here, is the relationship between our consciousness, which is who and what we really truly are, you know, the relationship between our conscious self and our world of thoughts. So there's one relationship, the relationship between our consciousness and our thoughts. And then there's also the relationship between our consciousness and our emotions, the world of our feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two most fundamental relationships that I think have a great deal of power in representing our biggest opportunities. You know, because if we can recognize that the way that we tend to either get swept away with our own thoughts and feelings, or the way we try to repress and push away and disconnect from our own thoughts and feelings, it will reveal the patterns that then show up in relationship with other people.
Yeah, beautiful, man.
Yeah.
In that regard, could you maybe talk a little bit about what is your relationship, your conscious relationship coaching model look like, and what does that process look like a little bit, Jason?
That's a great question. You know, it's taken a lot of forms too. Currently, I've really honed in on the communication, the edge of developing communication skills as the primary focus, because I've found that, again, from personal experience and from observing it in clients and other people, similar to how the primary relationship between our consciousness and our thoughts and feelings shows up as a core theme, the interface, the most ever present and critical interface, the vehicle that exists and facilitates our connection with other people, is communication. Whether that's verbal or nonverbal, most of it is, you know, most of what we're capable of like really recognizing and cultivating is. But to hone in on that and say, okay, in order for, regardless of whether there's a difference in our compatibility, regardless of whether there's a difference in, you know, how we deal with our internal worlds and our desires and our wants and our needs as individuals. Let's say we're talking about a couple in a relationship. Whatever is going on between that person who will never be identical to you and yourself, there will always be the medium, there will always be the vehicle of conversation that either has the capacity to create more distance between you, or it has the capacity to facilitate more connection between you. In other words, if you really were to take everything that you've ever struggled with in a relationship and boil it down to the biggest opportunity to make a difference, it would come down to, yes, definitely self-connection like we're already talking about, but it would be facilitated by communication. And one of the things that I really want to communicate and point out is that one of the things that we are up against as individuals in this culture, it contributes to our addictive natures, it contributes to our relationship problems and our general struggles in life. I like to see things in terms of development of consciousness. I see that the world is growing and developing in consciousness. You know, we're more aware, and you know, aside from ideas of like a golden age or certain pockets of communities that might have existed or currently exist, for the most part, we're progressing in our evolution as individuals and as a society. And the development of the psychological, emotional, spiritual development of people goes through stages. So when you when you look at a person growing up, do you have kids, man?
I do not.
Okay, so, but I'm sure you've been around them and you've noticed
yeah.
that, you know, they go through stages of development. And looking back in our own lives, we can see stages of our own development. The same goes in a collective sense. And without going into the whole model, because that would be a whole other conversation, I see, and it's been an incredibly useful tool, I see that the dominant paradigm, the conventional consciousness in the world is rooted in some kind of control. It's the conventional consciousness is about rules and roles and structure, and there's an underlying essential element of control involved in that. And the stage that we're all trying to move into is about self-connection and authenticity and conduit consciousness, we might say, where there's something bigger working through us. So there's these stages of development, and the old stage, the stage that we're exiting, which we might call control or conventional, includes a whole paradigm of language. Our communication in the previous stage is rooted in control. And the communication that actually facilitates our development, like really facilitates the emergence of our authentic selves, is rooted in authenticity and, you know, the support, the conscious supporting of our own and other people's authentic selves. So the old language paradigm tends to create conflict. It just does. Like, and I've been through cycle after cycle after cycle of conflict in my relationships, trying to talk to my partner and just having it blow up in my face over and over and over again. And it wasn't until I started switching the map in my head into focusing on a new set of principles. Like, I think most people don't even focus on principles when they're talking, they're just talking unconsciously. But when you become conscious of how that's not working and you consciously embrace a set of principles and begin to use those principles to guide your communication, you find that I have certainly found that the dysfunction, the unnecessary tension and conflict that tends to arise in every relationship just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And a new feeling of interpersonal safety and security arises in its place. And that safety and security creates a relational container where we're more safe to actually go in and deal with our own bullshit. Side.
Yeah, beautiful, man. You mentioned these principles that one may employ or live by in order to engage in more effective connection and communication. Could you maybe speak on some of these principles a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah. So I boil it down to 4 core principles, and I've posted a couple times recently on my page if anybody wants to check it out, where I speak about these 4 core principles. And there's some material on my website that's available in alignment with these 4 principles as well. I boil it down to sovereignty, empathy, sacred containers, and skillful means. The essential principles there being sovereignty and empathy. Those are capacities we have as human beings. You and I both, I as an individual, I have a certain capacity for sovereignty, for really actually owning my inner world, owning my thoughts, owning my feelings and my relationship with them, and owning my actions and my choices in the world. I'm sovereign in that way, and I can become more and more sovereign. Empathy is my ability to connect with another person, you know, through mirror neurons and resonant energy fields, or whatever you want to call it. My ability to put myself in your shoes in whatever way I can facilitate that and understand your reality and experience on some level the weight of what you're experiencing is integral to my ability to connect with you. And we have a word for that, which is empathy. You know, Like if you're having a hard time with something and like I'm able to see how you're having a hard time with that, and I can relate and I can feel the weight of that within myself, we have that as a connection point. Or even if it's not something that I've dealt with myself, I can see that you're struggling, and because I'm human, I know human what it's like to struggle. In general, I can still be like, my brother is struggling. I can feel that. When I'm able to like really cultivate that as a disposition, not just a skill that I put into place when I decide to, but also, and even more importantly, just a way of being. This is an incredibly spiritual principle that allows me to experience myself as not separate from the world around me. I think a lot of our opportunity for experiencing wholeness stands in this cultivation of empathy, the ability and the willingness to skillfully connect with other people. And that'll show up a lot, like you can see it in arguments, couples are having. It's really normal for us coming out of the old relationship paradigm to like lock up at a certain point and not be able to empathize with the other person because we're just so like totally engaged and concerned with our own experience in the moment. We've lost our empathy. So the ability to be sovereign and responsible for myself and yet also be able to connect with another person is the essential juice, the essential goodness that kind of gives me the ability to free myself from being totally affected by the world around me and not having choice within myself. And it also frees me from the false prison of feeling like I'm separate from everybody else. Sovereignty and empathy, those are the two like essential principles. And then there's like two like core principles that help support that process, which are sacred containers and skillful means. And at the beginning of our conversation today, I don't know if it was live when we did this, but you said this beautiful thing about how you wanted to set an intention and you wanted to open the space to the highest good and really just honor the truth. You wanted to honor goodness, truth, and beauty in the conversation and to let it be of goodness to the world around you. And that was how we began the conversation. That's establishing a sacred container. And that's one of several things that come into, having the sort of conversation with somebody where our sovereignty and our empathy has the ability to flourish. With that kind of an intentionality and the ability to maintain it throughout the conversation, we're going to have much more of an easy time staying in our sovereign choice of self, responsibility, self-ownership, presence. And we're also going to be able to like jive with one another and be able to connect with one another and resonate and understand and flow. So sacred containers, and then also skillful means. Skillful means is my sort of heading for what really amounts to nonviolent communication, or NVC. A lot of people are pretty like really uber focused on NVC right now. That's an amazing, really incredible, important thing. The short version of nonviolent communication, for anyone who hasn't familiarized with it yet, it involves sovereignty and empathy and sacred containers, but the real, like the fundamental steps, the four essential steps of nonviolent communication are observation, feelings, needs, and requests. I like to add stories to the front of that. So we're using these ideas that for recognition of the fact that I can have an interpretation of something which is different from the reality. So understanding my observation versus my interpretation or my story, recognizing that I have feelings and you have feelings, or whoever I'm talking to has feelings, and our feelings are valid. And no matter what, man, your feelings are valid. And one of the things we do in the old communication and relationship paradigm is we try to like stop people from having the feelings that they're having, because we're trying to stop ourselves from having the feelings that we're having, which goes back to our original point. But feelings, needs, underneath our feelings are usually unmet needs, or unpleasant feelings are unmet needs. You know, we all have their universal human needs that we have to have in place in order to experience wholeness as individuals. And recognizing that and permitting that and aligning with that puts us in a place where if I'm in my sovereignty, I can really actually own what my needs are. And if I'm in my empathy, I can really care about you getting your needs met too. And then I can actually make requests. So story, observations, feelings, needs, and requests. Requests without demand gives me the ability to actually, again, I have to really be in my sovereignty to do this. If there's an unmet need and it involves something that you're doing or not doing, it's up to me to make a clear and unambiguous request for you to agree to do something differently, something additional or something less or whatever it may be. You can see how important this is in a romantic partnership. But if I'm doing it without a demand, that means that I'm in my empathy, which allows me to honor your sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I can't place a demand on you and honor your sovereignty at the same time, because you have a choice. You have a choice in whether you meet my requests or not. So stories, observations, feeling, needs, and requests, those are the elements of what I'm calling skillful means, which is really nonviolent communication, which is the fourth principle. And the first ones are sovereignty, empathy, sacred containers, and skillful means.
Yeah, beautiful, man. That the skillful means, I come out of the Buddhist tradition, and I find that there as well.
Yes.
Where did you come across that concept? Is this your own formula, so to speak, or did you adopt it somewhere?
Well, the stories, observations, feelings, needs, and requests, that's totally nonviolent communication, or NVC.
Yep.
I grabbed onto skillful means from study of Buddhism as well, because there's a couple of ways that skillful means showed up in what I absorbed. I'd be curious to hear what skillful means to you in that context, but it has to do with, first and foremost, recognizing that the person that you're talking to, you and the person that you're talking to, are not ever going to be in the same place exactly. You're going to be operating from different perspectives on different levels all the time, no matter what, because you're different beings. And in Buddhism, skillful means comes into place where that truth is relevant to a teacher and a student, where it's recognized that the teacher is in a different place with their consciousness and their awareness and everything compared to the student. And so for the teacher to speak to the student as if the student was in the same place exactly,
right,
would be a poorly calibrated and ineffectual approach. So skillful means adapting your language, calibrating your language to meet the other person exactly where they're at,
right,
so that they can actually hear you, so that they can, you're bridging the gap between wherever you are. It doesn't mean that in a relationship, one of you is the teacher and the other is the student.
Right, yeah.
It simply means that we're coming from different places. And if I'm utilizing skillful means, I'm adapting my language to meet that person where they're at. The second part is recognizing that with NVC, nonviolent communication, there's a tendency for some people to kind of become fundamentalists about their use of nonviolent communication. And a fundamentalist would be somebody who grabs onto the structure of it like it's dogmatic, and any variation on that structure is just simply not allowed. And these are the people who they care. Obviously, there's no judgment here because I've done it too. But what ends up happening is they end up not actually embodying sovereignty or empathy, because they're too focused on making sure that everybody is speaking correctly. And, they're correcting their partners okay, well, you said I feel judged, but guess what? Judge is not a feeling. And it creates disconnection in their conversations. So
Right.
in this regard, skillful means the Buddha said something, if maybe you know this better than I do. He said something to the effect that his teachings are like a raft that should be, not just could be, but should be discarded
Yes.
once you get to the other shore.
Right.
Do I have that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's the idea. So skillful means let's use nonviolent communication in our relationships, but let's not get dogmatic about it. And let's make sure that we don't forget the reason we're using it is to facilitate our sovereignty, the cultivation of our sovereignty and our empathy as human beings. Those are the essential principles.
When I think about that formula, so to speak, I'm just calling it a formula, like those kind of 4 principles that you mentioned there. And I specifically look at the idea of sovereignty, my personal sovereignty, and also recognizing like maybe my partner's personal sovereignty, right? And appreciating and honoring that. And then the kind of the last component of the NVC of requests and demands. I think about, one of the healthiest components to a healthy conscious relationship to me, whether it be with a partner or with just anybody I'm interacting with, is coming from this place of non-judgment and non-attachment, and like I'm not coming from a place of need. I don't need you to be a particular way in order to please me. And I find when I allow, I'm just going to use that term loosely, I allow my partner or whoever I'm interacting with to be themselves, free of my need. It's just a much healthier, then they feel free to be themselves, and they can grow and expand at their own pace, and doesn't depend on my demands upon them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think what I'm hearing in that is actually that non-attachment element. That's one of the emergent properties of sovereignty and empathy. And the way I'm seeing it in this moment, which would be, I'm hearing you describe a situation in which you are able to really be who you are with what your reality is within yourself, and you're able to own that, which is your own sovereignty. And because you are also in your empathy, you're able to care about and see and understand the other person. And it's by virtue of the combination of those two things, you're able to allow your partner to be in their sovereignty. You're recognizing the fact that they have absolute choice over their actions, their choices, whether or how close to be with you. And for you to be unattached from that requires that you're able to honor them as a sovereign individual. So I'm hearing sovereignty and empathy embodied in that unattached state.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful way to describe it.
Yeah. Thank you, brother. What would you say, Jason, are like, maybe for a man listening to this, or a woman listening to this, or a conscious couple keying in on this conversation, what would you say are a couple, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 kind of best practices for couples who do want to be more conscious, more intentional in their relationship, and kind of live at that more elevated level?
Love that question. Yeah, I'm going to sit with that for just a moment and see what arises here.
Please.
I really do believe that if a person has not already picked up some self-inquiry practice, whether it's meditation or journaling or therapy, whatever, that the ability to continue to flex and grow and adapt to the ever-changing environment of a conscious relationship absolutely depends on the ability to self-reflect and excavate and develop ongoing, I like to call this ever increasing rapport with the self, which includes the unconscious aspects of ourselves. It's a big part of what we're doing through conscious relationship is we're actually, whether we intend to or not, if we are surrendered to the nature of life itself, a big part of what we're doing is becoming more conscious. And to become more conscious means to expand our awareness in an outward intellectual, spiritual way, but it also means to expand our consciousness inwardly. And as you know, there's a whole world of unawareness within ourselves. There are, whether you subscribe to Freud or Carl Jung or any of the ideas of there being a consciousness and an unconscious self, at the very least, there are parts of our inner reality that we are not paying attention to. And it's those areas of our inner reality that we're either not paying attention to or repressing or simply unconscious of, however you choose to look at it. That's almost always where the vast majority of our problems are coming from. So I would say, the self-inquiry, the self-reflection process is absolutely critical to being consciously a part, like aligning with and participating with this natural process of letting the unconscious become more conscious. And that is what allows us to grow and flex and dance with the ever-changing, always arising newness of life and relationship. So that's kind of like one of the key things. And then since we've already been talking about it, really deciding that you're going to, if you're a spiritual person, this part will speak specifically to people who identify in that way. If you consider yourself a spiritual person and therefore you are on the path of spiritual growth, the next key thing would be to really recognize, and maybe this is even a prerequisite, maybe this should be first, but to recognize and commit yourself to the idea, and I would say the reality, that your greatest opportunities for spiritual growth are right here and now, within your relationship with yourself and within your relationship with your partner. So do whatever you have to do to start seeing your partner as this gift, this divine gift of ever increasing awareness. So that would be an interesting shift for a lot of people, to go from my partner as this person I love, and we're a team and we get along and we make life together, and sometimes we piss each other off, but we get through it. To go from that to actually, no, this is a divine emissary. This is this individual, this sovereign divine being is here as a messenger of God or source, universe, in service of my own becoming, in service of my own growth. And they are here to help me make my unconscious more conscious so that I can embody more sovereignty, embody more empathy. I'm just going to stop there, like those two things.
Beautiful, man, beautiful. I feel like this ties in nicely. I'm thinking, I'm still exploring this for myself in my own relationships, and I look to couples who demonstrate a deep, loving, conscious, kind of cosmic relationship, and maybe couples who have been married a long time, and the love that they share. And I often hear about couples talking about relationship as this place in this space that allows them to explore love so much deeper and explore themselves so much deeper. Do you find that, and can you speak to that at all?
Absolutely, yeah. I think this is another angle on what we're already talking about, so it plugs right in. What is love? This is one of the questions of the ages. Excuse me. And I think it's a really important exercise or practice for us to ask ourselves the question, what is love? And to live in that question. So if we're doing everything that we're already talking about, practicing sovereignty and empathy, cultivating those things, using sacred containers and skillful means in our relationships, cultivating a healthier relationship, more dynamic and connected relationship within ourselves, their own thoughts and feelings, and therefore with other people, and therefore with the world around us. What is what is actually at work in all of that? What is the greater field of energy that is involved between all of those moving parts? And what is it that's actually prompting us? What is it that's inspiring us? What is it that's actually kind of pushing us and pulling us and guiding us through this big evolutionary process together? You know, we're getting spiritual, obviously. Is it God? Is it source? Is it energy? Is it evolution? Is it biology? You know, I think for me, one of the most important perspectives I've ever latched onto is that whatever God is, there's nothing more loving. So there's a really strong correlation between whatever God is and whatever love is. And that is the higher principle. That is like the overarching guiding principle. Like, I think that love is both consciousness and life force, and how those things combine in the world through us and through our relationships and constantly push us forward. And I've experienced by far, hands down, the most personal growth, the most personal evolution and expansion, and the most love through the fires of like really difficult relational situations. You know, like the impossible situations where it feels like I can't do anything right. There's no way out. I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. Whenever I feel like that, I know for a fact now that I'm being reinitiated into a new level of growth. And that new level of growth is going to expand my heart, and I'm going to experience more love.
Beautiful, brother. Beautiful. I was just listening to a speaker talk recently, yesterday, as a matter of fact. He was talking about, you know, the levels to which we can ascend, or the peak is oftentimes equal to the levels which we can go, or the pit. You know, it's like they are interconnected and necessary for each other in a sense.
I would agree with that. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, there's another cool thing that I like to talk about a lot, and my partners and I have a long-standing conversation around this idea. We use the phrase polaric expansion, and that kind of captures that there's typically, like you're saying, there's opposites in the world. You know, everything in the manifest world exists or expresses as a duality of some kind. There's emotional highs and lows. There's all of these spectrums, dark and light, large and small, within, without, all of these polarities. And relationships are incredibly good at pulling us in different directions at the same time. We're like, one in common. One is the value for love and the value for freedom, like love and commitment and partnership, you know. And on the other hand, freedom and novelty and expansion into, you know, the ever newness of life. I have both of those values within me, and they're both really fucking important.
Yeah.
And the more I embody them both, the more areas of my life I feel them like pulling at each other, or you know, pulling like in opposite directions from each other. And when that happens, there's this space in the middle, like it's like a stretching of a rubber band. And that's the tension. That's the tension caused by the two poles pulling in opposite directions. And if I resist that process, it's destructive to me. But if I embrace that process, it actually reshapes me and expands my experience of myself and what I am. So polaric expansion through the highs and lows, through the light and the dark, through whatever forms of tension we experience. And relationships will absolutely take us there.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd love to. I had a couple ideas around like attraction, if you don't mind, and
Yeah.
maybe to shift gears slightly, but it still, I think, it very much ties into everything we're talking about. I found in my experience, my journey with women, my journey with myself, my journey with others, my journey in intimate relationships and partners, when I was younger, I had a much greater sense of neediness around my relationships, specifically around my relationships with women. When I was younger, and maybe it's just part of the being younger and the conditioning that's around us and the story that's around us. But I felt it was my responsibility to go after more, to chase, to pursue, to get the girl, And
Mm.
and as I grew and as I evolved and I think became more myself and became more comfortable in my own skin and became grew more centered in my own power, right? And cultivated a greater sense of self-love, and wasn't so dependent upon the external circumstances to provide that for me. And I just kind of got into my own swagger, so to speak, and you know my swagger. And I found I began to experience this shift where I no longer felt I never no longer felt compelled to go out and get the girl to find the partner. I didn't have this neediness around it. I began to more naturally relax into this space of, like it's like law of attraction stuff. You know what I mean? The partner coming to me or through whatever beautiful events we crossed paths and we met. It was just a much more natural, harmonious experience. Can you speak to that at all, Jason?
Absolutely. Yeah, there are so many really valid and important angles that we could talk about this from. There's a lot of written material out there available, and like even some of the most like toxic, just as an extreme sort of contrast, some of the most toxic material out there has to do with like pickup artistry.
Right.
Has a lot to do with kind of like detaching from the pursuit and like really centering your focus on becoming satisfied with yourself and being attractive, being a magnet to women and whatnot, and letting them chase you.
Right.
Like that's actually like there's truth in that, and it's even present in that kind of toxic world of approach. And we can find similar things in a lot of different realms of thought, and thinking. But the thing that comes out for me when I hear you say that seems to be like the most potent and relevant would be to say that when I hear you talk about that, what I see, what I observe, through my own perception, which is mind, I see somebody who was born and raised in stage 2 control consciousness, conventional control consciousness, the matrix, and was inclined to operate in a certain way because that's the environment you were raised and developed and conditioned in. But as you became more and more conscious of yourself, and through the trials and tribulations of life, took the invitations to become more self-connected every step of the way, you went through this meta process of waking up and becoming a sovereign individual who is more, you're finding, going through that process will cause you to find more of your sense of satisfaction in life by becoming more in touch with and expressing who and what you really are. And that's the stage 3. So I see the progression from stage 2 to stage 3. And, we can talk about that in terms of like attachment theory, like going from insecure to secure. We could talk about that through developmental stages, where your ego is going through several stages of development and whatnot. And I think those are all totally, absolutely legitimate. But I see you going in this meta context. That's waking up. I think that's what we're really doing when we're going from stage 2 to stage 3. We're waking up to a greater reality, and we're becoming more connected with ourselves.
Yeah. Beautiful. I'd love to touch a little bit on your background around the hypnotherapy.
Cool.
Yeah, and maybe just kind of talk a little bit about a little bit of a shifting of gears, where where you came across that work, how you familiarized yourself with it, and maybe the relationship between that work and maybe the work that you're doing with your clients now.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah. So when I told you a while back, maybe 15 years ago or so now, I went through a divorce and I had an absolute rock bottom experience with that. A lot of people, the studies have shown, some studies have shown that statistically speaking, men tend to be hit much harder by a divorce than a woman is, just as a generalization, a statistical fact. I was one of those statistics, man. Yeah. My former wife, she went on, she was just fine, but I just tanked. I went downhill, I hit rock bottom, for a lot of reasons, including the fact that I had been, increasingly alcoholic, and just that was during the divorce. That was probably when porn use was at its worst, and the addictive patterns just took me downhill, and I found myself in this abyss, like just really super deep depression, self-loathing. I tore the meniscus in my knee, and I was stuck in my bed for like a couple of weeks before I even had the surgery, and then a couple of weeks after that to recover. So I was in bed for the better part of a month while absolutely hating myself and just absolutely wanting to check out. Like I really did get suicidal in my thoughts, and I for whatever reason, I made the choice to surrender to whatever was happening. In other words, instead of holding on to control by checking out, ending my own life, I decided to let myself actually die. I decided to let my ego die through that process. I just totally gave up. So I went through this kind of like abysmal free fall, and I came into contact with something inside myself that was more true than the feeling of self, that my sense of self that I had ever experienced up to that point. It seemed really familiar, but really unfamiliar at the same time. And I heard it say to me like something to the effect of, you need to become the man that she needed you to be. Wow. Like that was something, it was like a combination of my inner voice and my ego self, like in conversation. That's how it landed. And I was charged with this new sense of purpose, like, wow, I need to become the man she needed me to be, not so that she could ever have me, but so that I could become that man, because that's who I needed to be. Mm-hmm. And I was still stuck in bed though. And so I'm still stuck in bed, and I'm like charged with this sense of purpose. And I started really getting curious about, well, if that's how I was and this is how I need to be, what caused me to not be myself? What caused me to not be who I really came here to be? Why did I become this other person instead? And so I started, well, it's got to be something from the past. And so I started like going through in my mind's eye all of my upbringing, all of the experiences that I had as a child, from as far back as I could remember on, and going, yeah, I can see how this had this effect on me. I can see how this had that effect on me. And I was reading lots of books and stuff and like psychoanalyzing myself. And because I had done a little bit of like guided meditation and a little bit of, I've been an artist, a creative type my entire life, my imagination started to go to work. And I started going back to the most pivotal moments when the most traumatic things happened that seems to have the most negative effect on me. Went back to those memories, and I got really close to them, and I examined them, and I started to realize that my memories were having this major impact on me, but they're not reality anymore. They're simply these representations of something that I interpreted to have happened in the past, and they have this shape, and they have like a texture and a quality about them. And I wondered, like, what if I changed it? What if I changed the way that this is? What if I changed this image that I'm seeing of my dad leaving when I was a little boy? What if I change that into something else that actually would have contributed to a feeling of wholeness and a feeling of empowerment? And so I played with it, and I came to find out that, like, yeah, it's actually malleable. Like, there's a part of me that wanted to cling to it and be a victim of it, but there was another part of me that wanted to be a master of it. And so I literally figured out ways to re-visualize, to like dissolve the rigidity of the old memory and re-visualize it as something else. And then I kind of rehearsed it until it really genuinely felt like the old memory, the old traumatic memory, was no longer powerful, had no longer had like an energetic charge to me. And this new image of like this other alternative empowering story was still present. I was able to like anchor it. I was able to get it to stay. And so I did that with this, I did it with the next thing, and I did it with the next thing, and I'm there laying in bed. What else am I going to do? So I just did a whole bunch of that. And by the time the couple of weeks of recovery from the knee surgery was over, I had like shifted the way that I felt about myself and the way that I felt about life and reality in general, to the point that I was actually ready to get back up and take on the world again. And so I started going to like a meditation group and a number of other things like personal development oriented stuff. And I met a woman who I ended up dating for a couple of years at one of these meditation groups. And she asked me, we were talking about my story, how I got there. And I shared with her like what I had done with my imagination and my memories. She's like, self-hypnosis. You discovered self-hypnosis. Like, and you're an absolute natural. Like, I've never heard a trained person describe it better than what you've done. She's like, if you're on a mission to help people, you should teach other people how to do this. I was like, yeah, right. Like, hypnosis, I'm not going to make people quack like a duck, man, you know, and I'm not going to like be that guy. I couldn't even accept that was a legitimate path. But she's like, no, really. She was a counselor, like a marriage and family counselor, and she had been trained in hypnotherapy. And she's like, the most powerful aspect of what I do with my clients is actually hypnotherapy. And I highly recommend. And so she connected me with her mentor, and I got the training. And sure enough, you know, and there's a whole expansive world of other principles and techniques, you know, that need to be understood to like really be able to adapt to another person and help them to really change their stuff on the inside. So the training was absolutely necessary and important. And that was like a major turning point in my life, because everything that came after that in my career, all the way up to this point today, has been strongly influenced by those principles, by the idea, by the fact, in my opinion, that what shapes us is malleable. We are malleable from the core out, and we are not powerless. We're not victims to our experience. And I don't just mean that in a mindset way. I mean that in the sense that we can literally go back and change the things that have shaped us into things that actually serve us instead of just, you know, hamper us. So that was the whole story with hypnotherapy. And to this day, I still use a lot of those techniques when the time is right. You know, I still do self-hypnosis all the time. And when a couple, whether it's a couple or an individual, when they're going through something, we're really focused on this whole communication process. It still almost always facilitates the arising of their unresolved shit, because that's what relationships do. And because we're in the safe container, because we've created a safe container through the language and the whole situation itself, I'm able to step into the hypnotherapist role whenever necessary in order to facilitate somebody going back and rewriting something to, you know, result in something that actually served them and their relationship then and there.
When you say you go back and change the memory, so to speak, I'm just going to use that term loosely. Maybe there's a more articulate way to say it. Are you literally creating a totally different reality in your mind, or are you changing the story around that memory?
Great question. Sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other. And it just kind of depends on what's needed. And a lot of it has to do with like what the client is actually willing or prepared to let go of and replace. You know, because a lot of the things that have the biggest impacts on us are they're not just purely negative. They're woven with elements that are positive that we still have, you know, value for, whether we're looking back on them in the past or recognizing they even still have a positive influence on us now. So sometimes it's not as simple as going, okay, bad memory, replace it with a good one. A lot of the times it's actually, let's go back, let's find out what it was about the memory that does not serve. And let's find out what you as an individual are ready and willing to replace that part with. And so it's more like editing in a lot of cases, you know, like editing a screenplay or a movie.
Very, very, very interesting, brother. Is there a point that I say this lightly because it just sparks some questions. Is there a point in that work that someone can maybe take it too far and now they're like disconnected from reality, like they've got this whole fantasy story about where they come from or what they've been through, maybe they're even telling other people about it, like where's that line drawn?
Let me see if I understand. So I think what I'm hearing is it's possible for us to because, and often this happens with trauma, where the situation was simply unbearable. We were unable to stay present to it. And so we repress it, and part of our consciousness splits off from it, shoves it into the unconscious, and we create a new story in its place. And if I'm correct, I'm hearing you ask, is there a hard line between the repressed story and the replacement story?
Yeah.
And if so, what is that line?
Yeah.
Damn, dude, that was a big question because first of all, recognizing the nature of trauma is first and foremost to recognize that it's incredibly sensitive. You know, if something was so traumatic, so impactful, that we weren't able to stay present for it, present to it, move through it, and come out on the other side without shoving it down and repressing it. If something was that impactful, that traumatic, and it's still shoved down there, it's almost always still very charged with, you know, all of the unresolved emotional energy, emotional bioenergetic energy that was not able to be moved through or processed when it originally happened. So in a sense, if we're not careful with that, it needs to be sort of treated like, you know, like a landmine, potentially. It can be potentially explosive to just kind of willy-nilly, like guns blazing, charge toward it and open the corridor and let it all come screaming out, you know. Which is why it's so important to have skills that allow a person to start off by developing a safe place within themselves. Like we need to get somebody to a place where they can actually self-regulate their nervous system and re-access that place of calm and relaxation and peace, so that when it is time to go and touch on those things, they have the choice of touching a little bit of it at a time and closing the door and going back to their safe space.
Yeah.
And that's called titration, going back and forth between the safe space and the charged event. And now there's even more, like in the years since I originally got my training in hypnotherapy, become aware of and familiar with a lot of other really important modalities, such as somatic-based therapies. Like some of the most potent and useful and safe modalities for releasing trauma actually don't even involve directly going back and revisiting memories. A lot of them are actually just physical. You release it through the body, like TRE. I don't know if you're familiar with TRE as a trauma release exercise, and it allows the body to shake and release the energy that way. And so sometimes what I would suggest is that somebody actually see a specialist for that first, and like let the body release a lot of the energy associated with the trauma first. And then if there's anything left from that, then they can more safely go into it psychologically and write the stories. But there, I kind of indirectly answered it. The line between those two worlds is basically what we call repression. And there's different ways of describing it, but there's a reason that line is there. There's a reason that the barrier is there. It's serving a really important function. At least it has been. And so we need to respect that the barrier is there to protect us from being overwhelmed again. So it's a self-preserving mechanism, and that's the nature of the line, and that's why we need to treat it with such respect.
Beautiful. Thank you. As I mentioned to you, I'm going to be probably drawn toward the end of our conversation here today. But before I do that, I would love to do just two quick things. Maybe not quick, but I would love to just give you an opportunity, brother. Like, what is your message to the world? Like, what would you love to communicate to maybe anybody listening to this conversation today, or just in general? What would you say is your message, brother?
My main message would be, and I always need to preface this with, to the degree that this is true for you. If this is not true for you, throw it out. But I would love it, and what is for me a fact, which is that we are here on the planet for some purpose that's bigger than we will ever actually understand. But the closest I can get to that understanding is evolution. We are here to participate in a greater process. There's a greater intelligence at work in reality, and it is working most importantly through us and our relationships. And if we can recognize our personal development and our interpersonal, particularly romantic, sexual partnerships, as vehicles for our own personal evolution, we can also recognize them as vehicles for the greater evolution. So the most aligned and powerful thing that we can do is to align with life by letting it shape us through our relationships, and to just ever deepen into our sovereignty and our empathy with other people.
Beautiful, brother. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, man. Those were awesome questions. I love that.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you sharing. I appreciate your wisdom here, man. And I just want to give you the opportunity, brother, for any of you that maybe are catching the tail end of this conversation or did not catch the beginning. Today, we're talking with Jason Keene of Daring Heart Conscious Relationships. Jason, we're so honored to have you with us here today, brother. I'd love to give you the opportunity. Where can people connect with you? And maybe just a kind of a recap of maybe the ways in which you love to serve. Are you there? Can you hear me, brother?
The video cut out a little bit, and I'm pretty sure I was able to hear most of what you said.
Okay. Yeah. Just where can
So,
people find you? And
I think I heard an invitation to share what,
who and what? Yeah.
how people can connect with me,
Yep.
and what a next.
Yeah. On what basis? Yeah.
Well, yeah, the connection is still spotty, but in case anybody can still hear me,
Okay.
check out daringheart.com, as it's spelled the way you might expect it to be, daringheart.com. I've got a freebie on there for anybody who just kind of wants to dip in what's actually on the website. It's a 101 golden phrases for creating conversations that empower, connect, and heal. And it's literally a long list of sentences and sentences that I use, that my partner and I use, and a lot of our clients use in their relationships to facilitate sovereignty and empathy. So it's an incredible, like, it's a really quick and easy way to get a pretty solid sense of what it would look like to have more sovereignty and empathy, sacred containers, and skillful means in your relationship. So if that's of interest to you, that'd be an easy way to check that out. And also to work with me would be, currently I'm focused on a 7-week offering, 7 weeks of either one-on-one, whether it's me and an individual, or 1-on-2, whether it's me and a couple. And we can actually go through all of these principles. Take these principles and help you really get clear about how your relationship can be different when you embody these principles, and how they can really facilitate like a lot less argument, a lot less conflict, and a lot more ease and connection, and even synergy. I think a lot of the people who are resonant with this work are aware that their relationships are an opportunity for greater impact in the world. It certainly is for me. I am more impactful in the world when I have a synergistic partner like I do right now. And that is incredibly priceless, incredibly valuable. And that's the result that I'm looking to help people with.
Beautiful, man. Jason, thank you so much for being with us today, brother.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
Appreciate what you do very much.
Thank you, brother. I've got you tagged here and all the stuff, your name as well as your business. And if you want to shoot me maybe your website, I'll include that in the comments down below as well, okay? Thank you, brother.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
Thanks, man. All right. Bye-bye.